And or we parent by Zoom also while we're on Zoom. That's what we do.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to The VUU today, Thursday, March 4th, 2021. It is so good to be here with you. I'm Michael Tino, part of the lead ministry team at the Church of the Larger Fellowship, sponsor and host of The VUU, our weekly talk show. Joining you today from sunny. It is sunny outside, Peekskill, New York, in the Hudson Valley of New York, a little bit north of New York City, where my crocuses started blooming yesterday. And if you don't know me, a little ways to get to know me. The first crocus that blooms of the year, the first flowers of spring in my yard, it's like my spiritual new year. You know, the new year can start at any time. So mine is a movable feast that depends on the first crocus blooming. So happy new year, beloved. My crocuses have started to bloom. Welcome to The VUU. Chris, how are you?
I'm doing well. Thanks, Michael. My name's Christina Rivera. I'm coming to you from beautiful Augusta County, Virginia, outside of Charlottesville and Harrisonburg. And it is just a gorgeous, gorgeous spring day. It is just sunny and there's a nice cool breeze. And I'm so delighted to just be able to look out my window and see the birds and all of that going on. And I know that the first year I moved here, my Christmas card was a snow-filled Christmas card, which picture was taken on March 23rd. So I am not getting baked out by this weather. I'm just enjoying it for what it is. How about you, Don?
I am here in South Jersey, where it is, I have no idea. Well, it's bright. It's not exactly sunny, but it wants to be, you know. And here in South Jersey, it's we're starting to see the springtime stuff, and it's I had my crocuses were up last week. Michael was not on the week that my crocuses came up, so I missed telling you about that. But you know, here I live in a beach community. I live in a seasonal community. Atlantic City is about 15 minutes away. The boardwalk that runs from the southern tip of New Jersey all the way up to New York City really struggled last year with the pandemic, and the news of the possibility of everyone having access to a vaccine by the end of May has my community really hopeful that we might have a summer. And when you live in a seasonal community that relies heavily on tourism, that's a huge thing. So things here, however gray they might be today, are looking up a little bit. I'm going to wave to Tanner, who's behind the chalice, and runs things and makes us look smarter than I might normally be. And then we'll hit the roundup. Who's got, before we introduce our guests, we'll hit the roundup.
Yeah, and just so we're clear, Tanner is relaying any comments that come in live on YouTube to your panelists. So if you have questions for us or comments on the things that we are saying or that our guests say, please put them into YouTube, and Tanner will make sure to get them to us. So I hear the New Day Rising Anti-Racism Conference was a huge success. Were any of you there? I was not. I've been at them before, and they've been lovely, lovely conferences. But now that they're online, it was like 1,400 people, something like, which is pretty outstanding. Pretty outstanding, especially for a conference undoing white supremacy culture. Chris?
Yeah, I wasn't there, but I was keeping up with all of the folks who were, live Facebook posting and Twitter posting about it, and just really appreciated, the caucus space. There was space for different folks with different identities to be in space together, to move through the learning together, and really appreciated seeing, who some of the presenters were. Some of the presenters were just fabulous, and definitely makes me want to catch the next one for sure. Let's see what else. Oh, and so First Unitarian Universalist Church of Richmond, Virginia, has had an asylum seeker in sanctuary there for 32 months, the past 32 months, almost 3 years. And that is Abby Arevalo. And Abby was able to rejoin their family on February 25th, just a little over a week ago, and was able to go home and come out of sanctuary safely and with a promise of no deportation. So just a real shout out to Abby and to the First U Richmond Church community, who has completely changed how they were operating in order to make that sanctuary happen. That's a congregation that's local to me, so I've actually witnessed, the changes that they needed to make. They changed where their religious education program was happening. They changed how access to the building was handled. They had monitors, 24 hours a day on staff to be able to access the building, to make sure that nobody was getting in that shouldn't be. And there were fits and starts with it, and there were growing pains, and the community held in there and hung together. And Abby has just been an amazing advocate for sanctuary and for asylum seekers. So I'm so happy for that entire community.
Yeah. The other thing on the UU Roundup that I wanted to mention, and just hold in our hearts, is all of the people and all of the congregations who are in search right now for various and sundry positions. It is a challenge on the best of times, and a year into the pandemic and everything online is got to be even more challenging than in normal years. So holding gently all of those who are seeking a successful match in this search season. So.
And as congregations are searching for religious professionals, especially through the more formal ministerial search process, but for all sorts of religious professionals, we should also mention here on The View that the Church of the Larger Fellowship is searching for our learning fellows. We are looking for some learning fellows to spend 2 years learning and growing and experimenting and doing stuff with us. Applications are available. What we're looking for, the job description and how to apply, is available on our website, and Tanner will put the link into the YouTube chat. But if you are a religious professional of any sort, or a lay leader who wants to go into being a religious professional, we encourage you to think about this. It looks very much like a ministerial internship, and it certainly can be a ministerial internship, and many of our learning fellows have been emerging ministers, but it is not solely for ministers or for people on the track to ministerial fellowship ordination, our learning fellowship program. So we're hiring, and we're also really excited to welcome a new staff member at CLF. Our data services coordinator, Marin Smith, started this week, and you all probably will not get to meet her, but if you are a member of CLF and you have data that we need to keep track of, she will be helping us keep track of your data. And so we really appreciate her presence on our staff, and welcome her to the CLF staff today, this week. So we are really excited. We're going to introduce our guests and get into this conversation, to have the editors of the brand new Skinner House book, This Day in Recovery, with us. Reverend Lane Campbell serves as the minister of First Universalist Church of Rochester, New York, in the heart of Rochester's downtown. It is a beautiful church in Rochester, New York. Lane has been in recovery for the last 8 years. And the Reverend Katie Kandarian Morris has been a minister for 22 years and currently serves our congregation, a vibrant congregation in Durango, Colorado. Katie has been active in addiction recovery work for nearly 2 decades. And they have put together this, it is 365 meditations. And so it is an entire year of meditations focused on recovery, but not only for people in recovery. I have used several of these already in worship services and things. So Lane and Katie, welcome. Maybe you want to tell us a little bit about how this book came to be first.
Awesome. Well, I'll start, and then Katie, you can fill in the blanks for any of the pieces that I forget, because I'm sure I'll forget pieces. Thank you all so much for having us here. We are so excited about this book coming out this year, and we co-edited and gathered and partially co-wrote this book because we needed it, because we ourselves needed it. There is, as for me, as someone who grew up in a home where addiction was present, and also who is recovering from addiction myself, there has been a lot of translating that I have had to do between 12-step recovery and Unitarian Universalism. One of my first spiritual tools in Unitarian Universalism was a daily devotional book called Awakening the Soul by John C. Morgan. It was gifted to me by my minister when I graduated from high school and went to college. Since I got into recovery, I really dreamed about having a daily devotional that would be a part of that would be, in service to Unitarian Universalism and be specifically for folks, not just UUs, also people who are spiritually seeking in the rooms of recovery. Katie and I used to work together in Hayward, California at Star King Unitarian Universalist Church, way out there while I was in seminary, and Katie was my boss, and I knew she had this extensive experience in recovery. So a call went out from Erica Hewitt, from Reverend Erica Hewitt. This is such a weird story. Reverend Erica Hewitt, she was like, we need more tools for folks in congregations who are struggling with addiction, who are struggling with their own addictions, who are struggling with the addictions of their loved ones, parents who have children that are struggling with addiction, folks who have spouses, we need more tools. And I was like, well, I have an idea for that, but I'm not going to do it alone. So I called Katie, and Katie agreed to join me in this 3-year journey. This is 3 years of our lives through a pandemic, for me through a search cycle. Katie, I'm sure there's been life experiences that you've been through in these last 3 years that we've been pulling this book together. That resulted in having this resource, which we hope can be a tool and a resource for folks in our denomination whose lives have been touched by addiction. But Katie, did I leave things out? I'm sure I did.
No, you were completely thorough. And it's funny because now that it's finished and it's this book, it just feels like, oh, that was easy peasy to get that done. I forgot how some days I'd write 10 entries, and then the next day I would I can't do more than one. And I had to kind of tell myself one day at a time, and little cliche things like that. So, yeah. So, but it's really fun having a partner and someone that I know well and love, like Lane. So it's been a joy. And we found 12 contributors who, and that took a little bit of effort as well, just because we wanted to have diversity of many sorts, diversity of experience, diversity of addiction, because we wanted to speak across the spectrum, and really diversity of both either clergy and lay, and diversity of ethnicity, and etc. So anyway, we really enjoyed working with the people who were our contributors also. So, and I just looked up in the book, it's so funny because it says 365 meditations, but it's got one for February 29th, just in case you need to go there. And sometimes you will. And, but we had our contributors stick to 1 month and give us a number of entries for that month. So I've noticed myself as I'm reading each day that the flavor changes a little bit because the themes change for each month and the writers. So Lane and I have written for every month, and then we have a different contributor for each month. So that's probably the basics about the book.
How did you come up with the themes for the different months? Because I that was one of the first things I noticed when I, popped open the table of contents, is that it's arranged by month as a which you don't always get in a daily devotional, and then but then even further from that, then each month has a theme. So how did you all come up with that?
Lane, you want to explain that part?
Sure. Oh, thanks, Chris, for that question. So, lo and behold, there are 12 months in the year and there are 12 steps in 12-step recovery. So we started there, keeping it simple, and thought, that's something that a lot of meetings that I've attended will do. They'll just sort of say, we'll just focus each month on whatever, step in the 12 steps is corresponds with the same number of the month. And then we also wanted to see if there was a way to kind of distill some of the principles of those steps into themes too, because we didn't just want this to only speak to folks who are in a 12-step recovery, though that is my experience. That's what I come out of. That isn't for everybody in our denomination or, in our context really in the world. I think, there are multiple recovery programs that have worked for people. So we really also wanted to kind of give folks a theme to write around, also to be able to kind of dig deeper. I know for me in my ministry, like going through monthly themes has been really helpful to dig deep into particular themes and particular concepts. So being able to distill some of that and inviting folks to really focus in on some of those themes was a fun activity. And also, like, we invited some of our contributors to choose which step they wanted to write about and which theme until we ran out, and then just had to volunteer people which theme they were going to write on, because there's only so many months in a year, and there's only so many slots to fill. So we just asked folks to write around those themes generally too, because we didn't want something that would just be completely focused on the steps. Again, many entry points. We really want this to be a broad tool that can be available for a variety of experiences. And not everybody in this book wrote from 12-step recovery experience. We have folks in here from refuge recovery. We have folks in here from various, different recovery programs that have worked for them. And thankfully, their voices are in this book. So thanks for that.
I wanted to say one of the things, and it's come up for me recently, that, in other words, a colleague just told me about someone new that a member of their congregation who is new in recovery and did not want to go to 12-step groups because of the reputation of them being, I don't know, I've heard a number of things, religious, spiritual, Christian-based, maybe just scary in that part of not knowing because of that part. And I feel that as UU clergy and lifelong UU, when I first experienced 12-step meetings, I was a little like, but a little turned off by what felt like, Christocentric language. And but because I had my UU community to kind of balance it, and because I had seminary training and I could easily translate, I translated. And the longer I was part of the groups, the more I received from of various people's differences in their experience of that. Of what, like, as they say, we're in March, and what does it say right in where our theme is, made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood God. And to me, that actually added to my Unitarian Universalist theology by being, but why we think this book is needed is because not everyone has the tools of a seminary education and the ability to do all that translation. And in here, we wrote from either current understandings of theology, more broad understandings, and I think then it's more accessible to a larger group of people. So anyway, that has felt relevant when we were writing the book, but now that it's out, it feels like that's probably the most important thing.
Yeah, it's definitely one of the things I've noticed in emerging 12-step or AA groups is the desire to create groups that are, humanist centric, to kind of have caucusing or cohorts around theology that folks are better able to access than some of the traditional 12-step AA programs that higher power language that can sometimes my experience of it is that it's very non-denominational, but it is still theist in the higher power kind of language. And so I've noticed just even here, I was surprised to see in our local area that there's some humanist AA groups that are forming.
I've got a question, and I'm speaking just self-disclosure. When I got sober, Ronald Reagan was still president. Ronald Reagan was still in his first term. So I'm thinking about how important it was to my recovery to understand being powerless over alcohol, being powerless over other drugs, and I struggle sometimes now as a minister with how do I balance that understanding of powerlessness with the empowering message of Unitarian Universalism, the empowering, message of humanism, where we say, you are enough, you have the answers, you are sufficient, with that first step, which is admitted we were powerless, and the second step acknowledge that there's someone out there to help, or some force out there to help, and then the third is to surrender. And when I got sober, when I first found recovery, I needed that level of forced humility, because I was pretty sure I was smart. And smart had got me in, my version of smart had got me in not where I wanted to be. And so it was super important for me to simplify things. And in Unitarian Universalism, I think one of the things that we do is we like to talk and complicate things. So I'm wondering how that all sort of meshes. And I've struggled with it. I mean, I haven't been to meetings in a long while, but my spirituality is really based in those 12 steps. And there are days when I think, how does what I'm saying from the pulpit mesh with somebody who's in early recovery and needs to hear that message of simplicity and surrender?
Well, I'm happy to share about this, and Katie, I would love to hear your take on this too. For me, certainly, I think that my experience in recovery, especially with the first step, has been just accepting where I'm at, and I feel like for me that is it was a huge struggle. To be honest with you, I stayed in recovery for probably about 2 years, especially in a substance recovery program, for 2 years before really accepting my powerlessness, because I am amazing at negotiating with the truth intellectually. I was raised UU, and I was raised UU in a very, staunchly atheist, deeply intellectual, beautiful, amazing congregation in New London, Connecticut, where, so much of what I was doing was negotiating with whether or not I actually had a problem. I think there is such a relief and a release with that acceptance that we are powerless over these substances, and to just say, like, I am done fighting it. Because for me, that fighting looked like negotiating constantly, thinking about, the substance constantly. It was exhausting. And so, like, in some ways, giving up was really actually very freeing, but hard. It was a real challenge for me. Especially, intellectually, it was a really difficult piece for me, because that has been one of my deepest tools. And I think two things can be true at the same time. I think it can be true that I am powerless. And also I think it can be true that in the midst of that, I can be empowered to make my own decisions and to make my own choices. I mean, step 2 to me and step 3 are choices that I make daily. And I sometimes hear in recovery circles ways to kind of shame the intellect, or to be like, well, my bad brain got me into this situation in the first place. And that's not actually, for me, especially as someone who also grew up in a home with addiction, like, more shame actually isn't helpful. I can go to shame very easily, and I can live there and live my life there. I did for many years. But actually, I feel like both things can be true, that my brain can be a really powerful tool. Surrender, I think, may be one of the most difficult pieces for Unitarian Universalists. For me, that has really just looked like an acceptance of what is, and cooperating with the universe, and cooperating with a force larger than myself, whether that be like greater common human good, whether that be, the divine, whether that be for you, human community, whether that be a power greater than yourself, whether that be multiple powers greater than yourself, because of course we have many folks who are, who practice multiple traditions as far as deities and divinity is concerned. But just accepting what is feels really important to me for surrender. I also just want to say how we reconcile recovery work with the empowering message of Unitarian Universalism. In this book, we also write a lot about justice in recovery rooms and justice in our recovery work, and how social justice is a part of our recovery work. I have oftentimes heard in recovery this sort of tradition around no outside political issues then becomes we have to be completely neutral on issues of social justice and social injustice. And for us, we actually really wanted to write this book with an intentional piece around, like, yes, actually justice work is a part of our recovery work. That's actually a part of, like, where we can be empowered and where we need to be empowered to not accept the things that we can change, right? That's so key there. And that was a really important part of our perspective in this book. And it has to be a part of a Unitarian Universalist book about recovery. That has to be a part of it, or it should be a part of it, as far as I'm concerned. So Katie, I know you have something to say about this. I'm sure you do.
Yeah, I mean, I just, I think that these principles can be applied, but the other way I look at it is that when I'm not so self-absorbed, which is one of the main problems of addiction, is that I can't really think of anything other than myself. That like in the 12th step, my life is to be of service to the world. And to me, that's where a lot of the justice comes in, not all of it. But I mean, to me, that's one place where it's explicit. It's explicit in recovery work, where it says, if you aren't familiar, here in our book, service, generosity, and giving. And that means giving of myself and what I've learned. And it goes on to say, having had a spiritual awakening as the result of these steps, we sought to carry the message to other addicts and to practice these principles in all our affairs. And I like to think of it as practicing the principles. And I also think that sometimes justice looks like this, and other times it looks like this. And even when it looks like this, it can be life-changing, especially when I focus on it every day, and am engaged in recovery every day, which is another reason why I like having a daily reader. It's a reminder that small things every day.
It's interesting, Katie, that you talk about the self-absorption part of addiction, because even before you said that, I was thinking about what you were talking about, and Dawn, what you were talking about in terms of through the filter of individualism, and how like Unitarian Universalism has for so long been steeped in this hyper individualism that is part of white supremacy culture, and this notion that we are powerful by ourselves, like is to me part of the problem, because I know lots of the folks I know who faced addiction have relied on the community of accountability, have relied on relationships to break them out of that self-absorption and to give them a network of support. Is that part of what you're seeing too?
It's huge, and for me personally, it's huge. And I do have a higher power, but my higher power is the community. And whether that's the community of recovery, or whether that's the community of Unitarian Universalism, or whether that's the community of, our seventh principle, right? Or the larger, not just human community, but the earth community. So all of those things to me contribute to that. And when I have talked to people who were almost to the stage, sometimes they call that step 0, almost to the stage where they were thinking they might have a problem, they sometimes have used whatever it is about any recovery program as an excuse, which then can translate as denial. And that is one of the long time held characteristics of addiction, is that I don't have a problem, or that I don't like that. And I've also noticed that sometimes, not to be critical of Unitarian Universalism, because I'm a lifelong UU as well, and I love it. And yet sometimes I've seen us do that. It doesn't have anything to do with addiction, except for, wait, there is that Thomas Bandy book, right, called Kicking Habits, talking about addicted churches. So sometimes I think we can also make that connection to how we look at change in our congregations, or change in our movement with, what we're focusing on, as our vision becomes wider. Maybe not the best metaphor there, but, as we discover new ways to understand our faith, there, I'm drifting off. I don't know what the end of the sentence was. So there you go.
I was I would just remembered my first when I was in my first search process, I was looking at developmental ministries, and I was looking at interim ministries. And one of the things that in my reading about those ministries, and about specifically about developmental ministries, where you've got this particular list of things that you'd like to achieve, or that the congregation wants to achieve these goals, it occurred to me that the process is not dissimilar to that of the 12-step process. You know, where the first step is to say, wow, our system is super dysfunctional. That's kind of not what we want to be. And the second step is, well, there's a plan, there's a way to fix it. And the third step is, okay, we're going to try this. And then the fourth step is you got to clean house and figure out what it is we've been doing wrong. Right. And then the fifth step is you sort of say that stuff out loud. So you can't pretend it didn't happen. Right. And then the sixth and seventh and eighth and ninth are about learning new behaviors and fixing what's broken and making amends. And then, you know, in an ideal world, that congregation would go on to be able to mentor other congregations going through transformative work and healing whatever systems dysfunction are there. Unfortunately, I've yet to see it happen exactly like that would happen. But and part of that, I think, is because as anybody entering the recovery process knows, is that you have to be willing, right? You have to be willing to engage in the hard stuff. And that's way easier for one person than for a congregation of 200 people, right? Where if you get a congregation of 200 people and there are two people who are like, I don't like this, I don't think it's real, I don't like this program, I don't like it. And then boom, boom, it all falls apart, right? The buy-in has to be complete or sufficient to carry that forward. But I really think the 12 steps, I won't say this 12-step program, but the 12 steps are really sound, healing, transformative recipe, I guess is for lack of a better word, on how to solve a myriad of problems, not just addiction. So Darby thinks I'm smart. Thank you, Darby. Just because I say this out loud, and yet it has not been my experience yet that I've been able to affect that change in a congregation. I mean, it's one of those, like, the congregation has to collectively say, yes, we have this significant problem that needs to be addressed, and yes, we're reaching out for help. You know, and if you could get through those first three, the rest of them are easier. But I would love to see a book about how that works in ministry. I would love to see that in transformative ministry and how that parallels that work. So,
Don, you need to write that book. Let me tell you.
You've got to have an example to work from, though, and I haven't had that yet. So,
well, I will say, for me, you know, one of the things that's really been key in this time period, as Michael mentioned, like I serve a congregation in Rochester, and in Rochester's downtown, in Rochester, New York, where you know, especially right now, we are in the midst of a major social justice piece here, major social injustice piece here around the death of Daniel Prude, and none of the police officers being held accountable that were implicated in his death. And I can tell you right now, the 12-step recovery has really helped me in some of my discernment in this pandemic and moving forward around, you know, am I actually being of service, or am I doing something to look good? And that's definitely an important question in the midst of a movement moment. And also it's been important for the congregation that I serve. You know, like the work that we're doing right now, are we doing it so that our reputation is good in the community? Or are we actually here to serve the movement and do the thing that we're being asked to do? That likely won't get the news coverage or that won't get the book written about it, that's for darn sure. But that's going to try and at least like follow the leadership. And I think our denomination struggles with this. And I think our churches struggle with this. And a lot of that is, you know, are we willing to come to terms with the original issue around individualism? Are we willing to come to terms with the problem that is white supremacy culture that's like written into many of the cultures of these communities? Do we actually want to see, you know, a shift in Unitarian Universalism that is going to be a Unitarian Universalism for this present time period? Some of what you're talking about, Dawn, makes me think about some of the recommendations for, you know, in widening the circle of concern from the Commission on Institutional Change. And as I read through some of that stuff, I'm like, this is genius. This is amazing. These people have pulled together so much. And like, I would really love us to read that piece as sort of our step one here in our denomination and say like, oh my gosh, there is a list here of things over which we are powerless. And here is some of the roadmap to take these 12 steps, which I think is brilliant, a really great idea, Don. And to move ahead in this. I wish we'd reached out to you to contribute to this book. Darn, you know, missed opportunity. I'm sure we're going to keep.
Well, thank you. Thank you. I just, I remembered because, you know, pandemic brain and recovery brain, and I'm 55, I think, brain. And so all of that stuff, I just remembered that at one point in my sobriety, I had a sponsor who was super, super sweet. Gay man who was a Vietnam vet who was a medic. So he knew from PTSD, and he was brilliant and wonderful. And I came to him 20 years sober looking for help with a fourth step that I'd never done. And he said, I remember he was one of those guys who was like, I'm so glad you reached out. You're exactly where you're supposed to be. And I was like, I want to kill him. You know, I'm this sniveling, drippy, sobbing mess at 20 years sober. This is not what I had expected. But of course I hadn't done any steps, so that might have had something to do with it. And he said to me, all you have to do is be willing to change everything about yourself. And I said, okay, whatever, I don't care. I just make it not hurt like this, right? And when put that way, very few people are willing to say, yes, I need to change everything about myself. I think, and this is one of those things that I know internally from sobriety, and I hear other people say, people who don't understand sobriety, and they say, oh, congratulations, you're so brave, you're so strong, you've done all. I'm like, do not confuse desperation with virtue, right? Every bit of progress I have ever made is because I was backed against the wall and somebody was poking me with something sharp, right? Like I tried all the other easier, softer ways and none of them worked. And it was only when the nasty one was the only one left, that's what I did, right? And that's where the growth was. And this work is really hard. This work is really hard. And, you know, every now and then, like on my sobriety anniversary, which is in November, I actually still to this day don't remember the date. I have to look it up every year. 1984 on the Wednesday after, like I've got this mental block. I don't remember. And people will say, oh, that's so wonderful. That's so great. And I'm like, you know, I was dragged through it by my toes, man. I did not approach this as a self-help program, like joining the gym. I'm going to get fit and healthy. No, I did this so I didn't want to blow my brains out. Like that's what it was. You know, sobriety is for me was not about this gallant journey into spiritual depth and guru status. No, it was about just trying to make life not hurt. And so when you want to apply that to a congregation, to a system, not even a congregation, but think about a system, think about a corporate system, think about a community system, think about any sort of organizational, organic system. In order to make those really painful, really challenging, really difficult steps, you have to be willing to do that stuff. And for me, that willingness only came as the last resort, right? I'm sure there are people out there who thought, oh, look at these 12 steps. These are a wonderful plan. I will sign right up right now and sit down and with my little notebook and do all my things. I wasn't that person, I was not that person. It was a long, ugly, messy road, and I did everything wrong but not drink. Right. I did everything wrong but not drink. And so I remember when I was in search in that first year when I was looking at developmental stuff. And I said to one congregation, I went through my spiel about how this is, like you have these steps to transformative change, and it's a really good model. And I said to them, so are you willing to change everything about yourselves? And there was this silence. And then 4 people said yes, and 1 person said no. And I said, I'm not your minister. And it was a challenge, but but I heard in that moment the truth, that there were 4 aspirational yeses. And there was one guy who was like, we are totally not ready for that. So how that, I would love to see it work. I would love to see it work in a systems level application. And I would love to talk with anybody about what that might look like, but I haven't seen it yet. It's a great plan, but I haven't seen the practical application beyond the individual.
Well, Don, I really appreciate you lifting some of that up because for me, the reason, I got into recovery work because I was in a chaplaincy training program, and my CPE supervisor turned to me during group interpersonal relations and was like, well, you're a dry drunk and maybe you should try getting into Al-Anon. And honestly, I had been, folks had suggested Al-Anon to me as I was growing up in an alcoholic home. It was pretty obvious with a lot of the, adults that I was working with through my schooling. And folks had suggested it to me before then, but quite frankly, I was so terrified about getting the help. And, it's interesting that you talk about congregations, because I grew up in a Unitarian Universalist congregation where addiction was present in my home and nobody was talking about it. And our UU congregation was not where we could come to talk about it. UU church is generally where we went to look good. So nobody was talking about it. And it was the last place that I felt like I could go, not out of any sense of, my church was a beautiful community and it was a great place to be, but it was also, my alcoholic parents' community. And so, I will say one of the hopes of this book is that we can also honestly face that in Unitarian Universalism, so many of us live with addiction, and that so many of us are in need of resources and help. And we're not talking about it at church. One of my hopes in pulling together this book was that we could actually invite, I dream of a world where folks are struggling with addiction and they can actually come to their Unitarian Universalist church and talk about it. I dream of a world where no more kids have to go through a religious education program and then get to the end and feel like they still have one of the deepest secrets of their lives that they're not telling anybody in their youth group, even though I can tell you from experience that multiple kids in the youth group that I was a part of were also living in alcoholic and addicted homes. I know that for a fact now as adults, of course.
And we are so much more comfortable talking about, we will so much more relatively talking about sex like owl and you know, all of that type of thing than we are about addiction and death. Like those are the areas in which, you know, as a religious educator, I just see folks, you know, head for the hills. And no, we don't want to talk with our children about, you know, suicide and death and addiction. And, you know, that's just going to put that into their brain. And, you know, if we're like, you know what, it's already there. They are a living human being in our society. They know that this is part of our society. So if we don't talk to them about it, somebody else is. And they're just the same as we do with sex ed. The information that they're going to get is going to be probably factually untrue and harmful. And so, yeah, just wanting to, you know, open up those levels of communication. And to Dawn's point of, you know, yeah, we can talk about race with little kids. Like, you know, it's not a bad thing. We can talk about all of these things all the way through faith formation and spiritual development and life development, as long as we're doing it developmentally appropriately, right? So that's really what we struggle with, I see, as a religious educator.
I think,
and Dawn, now I'm going to read this book as I'm reading the Widening Our Circle book for the third time now, but I'm going to read the two in conjunction with each other because I think there's something there. So thank you for that idea.
I recently, like last week, preached on beloved community and to do with racism. And I went back to Paul Razor's Faith Without Certainty and the chapter on the challenge of racism. And he names very clearly that one of our really big problems is our focus on individuality. And one of the ways that we avoid feelings and the really vulnerable stuff is that we get very theoretical and very intellectual and very individualistic, which allows us to hold all of that stuff at arm's length and not get messy. Yes, we'd like to change the world, but we'd like it to be tidy, please. You know, we'd like it to be neat. And we want to change the world, but we don't want to change anything about us. Right? And this is from 2005. And it wasn't new then. Right? I mean, Michael's laughing yeah. And this named that reluctance, that systemic defense that our faith has against change. And the first thing you have to do with change is acknowledge that there's something better than where you are. So that was upsetting when I reread that. I was like, oh, hell. Oh, hi, Laura. And all the grown-ups are like, oh, completely lost track of whatever we were saying. Look, there's a child.
Sorry, distracted you with the 7-year-old.
That was the best. That's okay.
I live in an elementary school.
But so yeah, I mean, it's how you season the pan matters. You know, how you season the pan matters. And this stuff is in our foundational DNA. And if we want to cook something that doesn't taste like that foundational DNA, we've got to do some serious scrubbing to that cast iron to get the white supremacist seasoning out of it.
Yeah, thanks, Dawn. I guess one of the things that I'm thinking also as people who might be with us today that are thinking about, well, I don't have to deal with addiction. It's not in my family, or it's not in me, or those kind of things. The other thing that Lane and I were hoping for this book is that it would be a tool for everyone to read, to have that kind of practice of a spiritual practice of a daily reader that's based on really on spiritual deepening, because that's my own personal experience. That's what's happened to me when I think about whether I'm dealing with the pandemic, whether I'm dealing with anti-racism work, whether I'm dealing with the person that lives in my house with me, that I need to be engaged daily on work that is reminding me of these principles, and reminding me that even though I think I'm pretty good, even though I think I'm pretty worthy, that I always have room for self-improvement. And doing that helps me not go to despair, not go to I'm worthless, because that is another thing that that's had happened to me in the past. Luckily, not so much anymore, because I have been doing this work seriously for nearly a couple decades, and but that I don't have highs and lows, that I can be more even keeled, and some days are better than others. And when I face something, I can say, how can I apply the principles that I've learned from recovery, the principles that I've learned from Unitarian Universalism, and how can I meld those together and use them both.
Well, this has been amazing and just wide-ranging and free-flowing discussion, and I loved it. I loved every minute of it. We're coming to the top of the hour, the end of our hour. Is there anything that you may want to make sure gets said about this book or about this process? The Day in Recovery, 365 meditations, but it's actually 366 because you've got Leap Day in there. I love it. Any last words you want to leave us with?
I just want to lift up some really deep gratitude to you all for inviting us, really for our first time to publicly speak about this book. It's happening here at the VUU. And we really want to encourage congregations, communities, individuals, reach out, get that book. Also, grab a couple of extra copies for your friends, for folks, especially if you are a religious leader in your congregation. Having a couple of copies on hand for when that person comes to you to tell you the truth of their experience can really be invaluable to be able to hand them this tool. We're really hoping that this is a tool in service to our denomination and in service to folks who are in recovery or who are hoping to find recovery at some point in their lives, and to folks whose lives have been touched by addiction. And so I'm just really grateful to be here. And Katie, I want you to have the last word.
Well, it's not exactly the last word, but Lane and I were both really pleased that that Skinner House, when they received the manuscript, they thought that this was a book that really spoke not just to Unitarian Universalists, but outside our movement as well. So it will be widely distributed in the trades, as they call it. I don't really know how to use that language, but it will be available all over. And we shifted a couple things so that it could be that way, tried to not use insider language and that's probably a good thing to do anyway. But it will be available all over. And I feel really glad about that too. The world could use this, not just Unitarian Universalism.
Well, thank you, Katie. Thank you, Lane. Thank you for the book. Thank you for coming on the show to talk about it. I know it has been really well received by folks that I've given it to, who are really overjoyed that their faith and their recovery have been connected in such a beautiful, meaningful way. So we will see you next week on The View, when we will discuss something scintillating, and I don't know what it is. So it's been great. Have a wonderful week.